Hello and welcome back to Living the Reno. This is episode 3 of our kitchen build series. Today we're going to be running all of the wiring and doing the rough-in for our electrical. First order of business was tackling the countertop receptacles. There was only one 15 amp receptacle on the left, and then somebody added one 20 amp plug on the right. We are going to have to upgrade this to 4 20 amp plugs for the amount of counter space that we're actually going to have. Once we opened up these walls, which had like a lath board on the back and plaster on the top of it, we quickly noticed there was some branding on the back of the drywall and there was branding on the insulation itself. That made us question about asbestos, as these brands are known to have it. So we had to take a little pause for the renovation, send them off to a lab, and wait for the results. Thankfully, all of our tests came back negative and we were good to continue removing the rest of the drywall. So this chandelier was kind of placed awkwardly in the middle of the room and it wasn't going to work with the layout with the island. There was also wires feeding in and out of this box, so the chandelier had to come down and we'll have to relocate all those wires. Now this is where things got a little interesting. We knew that there was a junction point somewhere in this entranceway where all the original wires ran, but for some reason there was only one wire sticking through this light box. So after this, we opened up the light switch to see if there was any other wires that made sense, and we still couldn't find where it was coming from. Now we remembered when we first looked at our house before we bought it, we looked on the Google Street View and it didn't have a front porch before, and we noticed that there used to be an old porch light out the front soffit. So this is where our journey led us next, was searching the soffit to see if we could find a hidden junction point. And lo and behold, there's the junction. Now, junction boxes aren't illegal to have, but they do have to be accessible. Since we pulled a homeowner's permit for all this electrical work, we do have to fix these things. Unfortunately, we could not delete this junction box, but we're just gonna lower it and then be able to cut a hole in the soffit and put a cap on it so you can access it. Now, unfortunately, this wasn't the only hidden junction box. We were still looking for more wires, and as it turns out, they dropped the ceiling in this entranceway and they just kind of covered up over the light. So that's where those wires were hidden. With all the wires finally located, it was just a matter of cutting enough access holes so we could feed up wires from the basement, and then cut an access hole at the top so we could drill up through the top plate and run all of our new wires for the new lighting. Once we drilled through the top plate, we just took a glow rod and poked it through the hole so we could see it. Since we had the soffits open, it was actually easy to go outside and be able to snake the wires through out there, as well as staple them and get them routed exactly where we needed them to go and tied back into the porch light. We ended up having to change out this box as well, as the old boxes were a little bit smaller than the new ones, and we were putting a lot of extra wires in here. On this side, the original circuit feed, we're actually going to repurpose this wire and use it for a lighting circuit, but we just had to move the box a little, put in a new one, and reattach it with new wire staples. Now began the process of running our new wires. For the countertop receptacles, we're gonna need a 20 amp circuits, so we're gonna have to run the 12 gauge, which is the yellow Romex wires. So we just had to drill through the bottom plate into the basement. Thankfully, our basement is unfinished in this area we're doing the kitchen, so it was easy enough to feed the wires through, but it was still a lot of work to snake them down and pull them through the back wall. This is the other side of this circuit, so we're allowed to have two 20 amp plugs on one circuit, so it's just a matter of running basically one plug to the other plug. And on this side, we were luckily able to use the one on the left because someone added it, but they just snaked it through the wall, so we had to put it in a different box, staple the wires, and then run a wire from one side of the stove to the other through the basement. Now, as far as the stove receptacle itself, it used to sit on the outside of the wall and the wire just came up through the floor. Not only is this a little unsafe, it means that we couldn't actually push our stove all the way up against the wall. So we just pulled it back through the floor and then pulled it up through the stud bay and then recessed the box into the wall itself. Now for the range hood, there was never one in this house, so we had to run a wire into a spot where it's going to be installed. We just ran a simple 15 amp 14 gauge wire, and we hooked it up to what used to be a plug on this side of the kitchen. We turned it into a junction box and pushed it onto the other side of the wall because this cabinet's going to be here. There wasn't hardly anything on that circuit, so we were able to add this range hood to it. Renovations can make a real mess real fast, so just taking a moment here to tidy up and organize. The next step in the process is we have to map out the entire kitchen so we can figure out where everything's going, such as the lighting, the dishwasher, and most importantly, the island, because we're gonna have to run the island light, which is supposed to be directly over top of it. Our pot lights are supposed to be directly over top of our work surfaces, and you know exactly where the dishwasher is going. Now, luckily, our refrigerator is already on a dedicated circuit from the original kitchen layout. So when they moved things around before we moved in, they actually put the fridge on a non-dedicated circuit. So luckily, it's back to where it was. We don't have to modify that circuit at all. The biggest challenge in this was our house is actually built off square, meaning they didn't square up the house when they actually built it. So figuring out where the island was a bit of a challenge, to say the least. Once we figured out where the island was going, we found the center point of the island, and then using a laser level, we transferred it to the ceiling to figure out where our island light was going to sit. As you can see, it's actually not that far off from where that dining room light was, but where the dining light was not going to work at all, so we were gonna have to remap the wires into this box, and so it was just a matter of cutting out the exact spot and installing the box. To map out where the pot lights were going, we measured the centered point and measured out from the upper cabinets and then transferred that point with a plumb bob up to the ceiling. That way we would have the pot lights shining directly down on the work surface itself. Now, as far as the front goes, we were gonna add a light centered on this drop box, not where that original light was. And then we had to send that measurement down the hallway as we wanted to add lights in a linear line. So we just took some reference points to get it square on this box and then just sent it all the way down so we could figure out where those lights were going. Now, in order to minimize the amount of drywall dust, and minimize because drywall dust gets everywhere no matter what, we decided to put up these plastic drop sheets between the living room before we drilled the holes. Now, as far as the holes go, they were pretty simple. We just took a pilot bit and drilled a small hole first and then came back in with the hole saw, and that was able to line up with the pilot bit on the hole saw itself, and it made it much easier to figure out exactly where we were putting the holes. Once we drilled this hole in the front here, we actually pulled out the old wire that they ran, and check this out. They actually put a staple pretty much right through the wire. That's nice. And that is a little mess of the front ceiling. Now it's just a matter of going on and drilling all the rest of the holes. We plan on putting on slim pot lights, so even though some of them landed on joists, we'll be able to install them no problem. Now on this side, we have a 4-gang box here that we had to add some wires to as we're running a 3-way switch from the foyer over into this spot so we can control the kitchen lights from both the front door and the back door. Now I will note there was 3 different live circuits in this one 4-gang box, so always be careful when you're checking boxes like this, because just because you kill the power to one doesn't mean you kill the power to all. This wire here we're gonna actually reuse to pull the new wire through the attic so we don't have to get all the way into the corner. Now it was time to crawl up into the attic and start feeding the wires. It was not a very fun process. It was very messy. There was a lot of loose insulation up there. Not a very good time, but a necessary evil in order to get this job done. Using the glow rods was a huge saving factor. We didn't have any before we started this, and using them was really awesome because you could poke through all the insulation, and when I was up there, I could see exactly where I had to go to pull another wire or to feed one into. Now, here's a little while we're at it syndrome renovation going on. So our living room, which is right beside the kitchen here, has 0 ceiling lights. It was only powered by a lamp. And so since we already pulled an electrical permit and we were already crawling around in the attic and had everything ready, we decided just to go ahead and add some pot lights and a switch into the living room itself. It's hard in a renovation to touch one area and not touch the others, as a lot bleed into each other, but we were really happy that we decided to go through this. It wasn't a lot of extra time or money to add these much needed ceiling lights, and would have been a more daunting task on its own. Now it's just a matter of finding a way to get the power up into this wall without having to rip into the wall as much and make 1,000 holes. We tried to minimize the amount of patches we had to do later, but some were just completely unavoidable. Okay, back to our regularly scheduled programming in the kitchen. Now we're running the power line for the dishwasher. We are running another 12 gauge wire, 20 amp circuit, and it was just a matter of, again, drilling a hole through the bottom and feeding it through the basement. Now, in order for us to install the last of the circuits, we actually have to build the 2 cabinets that are going to form our island. We got 2 30-inch base section cabinets from Ikea, and we're just putting those together now, as we're going to have 2 20-amp plugs built into the island, as well as an island built-in microwave. Building Ikea cabinets is kind of like building Lego for adults, and once you build one, it's kind of easier to build the rest. But you just have to take your time and do it piece by piece. And if you don't take it apart once and put it back together, you're probably doing it wrong. Now, it was important to get the island exactly where we needed it to go and at the correct level. We're going to build these 2 small, almost like pony walls sticking out from the island as a support for the island countertop, but as well as where we're going to house our electrical into. So we had to get that basically in the right spot so we could know exactly what height it had to be at. Then came the moment of truth where we had to drill a hole through the floor. This is the no turn back point. Once we got the hole drilled and we figured out we were not hitting any cross members, we drilled a bigger hole to feed the wires through. Now we ended up running these 2 wires at the same time. One's for the receptacles and one is for our built-in microwave. And it was a matter of running it all the way through the basement. Now, as you can see, we've already ran a bunch of wires this way, and so we had to pick a different spot to run these ones. Our joists are 12 inches on center. They're only 2x6s, so there was a lot of joists that we actually had to go through in order to get all the way to the panel. Now here we're just drilling up through the bottom of the floor for the other receptacle on the other side of the island. I feel like I'm in the attic again, except I'm upside down. In order for us to call for a rough-in inspection, we have to have all of the wires attached, so they have to be stapled to the wall. They have to be installed in a box. All of the wires that are getting tied together have to be tied together and moretted, except for the wires that are going into any receptacle, switch, or light fixture. So it was just a matter of going through and make sure everything was roughed in correctly. In order for us to install the final box, which is for our built-in microwave, as it comes with a plug-in, it's not a direct wire, we had to install the drawer, which was underneath the microwave to get the right height for the shelf. And once we got the right height for the shelf, we were able to run the electrical box in the right location. So we kind of had to build part of the island, as you see here, just to get all the wiring set up exactly where it needed to be. Now back to our favorite 4-gang box over here. It turns out that the box itself was too small for what we needed, like in the cubic volume, as well as the connectors were screwed in from the outside of the box, so I couldn't actually remove any of the wires without taking out the drywall. So we figured it was easiest just to remove everything and install a new 4-gang box. We are careful to label all the wires so we knew exactly which ones went where. The last connections we had to make was to actually install these converter boxes for the pot lights. They were extremely easy to install. They had these nice quick push connectors, and once you installed one, it was very easy to install all the rest. Now it's just a matter of running all the wires into the panel and attaching them and securing them so we can call for a rough-in inspection. Once that is complete, we'll be able to patch all of our holes and move on with the rest of the renovation. Have you guys ever come across any weird electrical things in your house? Especially if you live in an old house or have done any work to it, I'm sure you've noticed. If you guys want to drop a comment below, we would love to hear all of your stories. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel so you don't miss out on any future content. As the next one, we are going to be patching all of our holes and moving on with the kitchen renovation. But until then, we will see you in the next video.